I apologize for any wind noise in advance. It's another blustery day out here in the forest. I am filming this now because tomorrow we're supposed to get 60-mile-an-hour winds, followed by up to a foot of snow. Yes, things are still blooming behind me, so it's just that kind of weird weather year. Right next to me, we have the all-new Honda CR-V Hybrid. This is not the first CR-V Hybrid, but it's more important than it was last time because this is now available as a less expensive front-wheel drive model, and Honda says that they expect a full half of CR-Vs to end up as hybrids starting with this model year. Let's take a deep dive into the CR-V, but first, let's talk about how it drives, and then we'll get back to what it looks like and how it seats on the inside. As we get the CR-V out on the road, keep in mind its curb weight. The lightest version of the CR-V for 2023, that would be the front-wheel drive 1.5-liter turbo, is just about 3,500 pounds. And I'm driving the hybrid with all-wheel drive and all the bells and whistles. This comes in just about a cupcake shy of 4,000 pounds. Well, you know, 3,950 basically for this particular model, plus, of course, me as the driver. That obviously is on the heavy side for a compact crossover in the US, and it likely has to do with the new crash structures, Honda's desire to make this the safest entry in the category possible, also all of the luxury features that we have on this model, things like dual zone climate control, heated steering wheel, etc. All of that adds weight. Now, the downside to that is that does compromise the 0 to 60 performance. With a dealer-provided 1.5-liter turbo all-wheel drive model, I ran 0 to 60 in 8.5 seconds. That's definitely slower than the last generation CR-V. And this hybrid, it was also just a little bit slower. This particular model went 0 to 60 in 7.6 seconds. If you get the Sport version, it's probably going to be a little bit faster because it is a little bit lighter, but keep in mind there are a decent number of lighter options in this segment. As far as comparisons go, the Toyota RAV4 Hybrid, obviously the most direct competitor to this, will run 0 to 60 in about the same amount of time, but the Sportage and the Tucson, also close competitors in hybrid format, will go 0 to 60 in 7 to 7.1 seconds. So those are definitely going to be a little bit swifter feeling than this. Now, depending on how you want to look at it, pro or con, they're going to feel pretty different than this. Even though Honda has for some reason chosen to make this feel a bit more like a vehicle with a traditional automatic, and I suspect that is why it is slower 0 to 60, the feeling of the transmission shifting is going to be unmistakable in the Sportage and in the Hyundai there. If I come to a stop here, I'll show you what I mean. If I just go ahead and floor it, the engine revs up, we get what feels like a shift because the engine RPM drops. Now, there's no particular reason for this to do that because it is a serial hybrid at low speeds or at high acceleration demand. So all that's happening is the engine is spinning a generator, the generator is generating electricity, and that's shuttling over to the electric motor. So all that is doing is making the vehicle go 0 to 60 slower, but imitate what's going on in a vehicle with a regular stepped automatic. I think that's a little bit silly. I would rather just have the quicker acceleration.
This video is brought to you by Carmigo. Carmigo is an easy way to sell your car. You can get set up in minutes and get multiple offers in the same day. The way this works is you enter a few basic details in the website, set a minimum price, then use the smartphone integration to take pictures of the vehicle. It'll even guide you through how to take those pictures, how they want them framed, etc. The software will automatically generate a vehicle condition report, and then you sit back and wait for the offers to roll in. Unlike some sites that need 1 million photos to get your car listed, Carmigo only needs 13 pictures of your ride to get it listed. They'll even arrange for pickup. If you're interested, use that link below and get a discount on your listing fee.
On the other hand, there is a logical reason that Honda chose to do that with this generation CR-V, because customers wanted it. A lot of customers dislike the fact that the engine just revved up to a particular RPM and hung out there. They've solved that with this. There's a downside. That downside is acceleration. When it comes to the braking scores, I'm a little bit torn. Actual stopping distance is on the long side. This model took 131 feet to stop from 60 miles an hour to 0. Remember, nearly 4,000 pounds of curb weight. On the other hand, brake pedal feel and the regenerative braking system design is absolutely perfect. Brake pedal feel is very consistent, whether the battery is full or it's not, because of the way this system handles regeneration. Now remember the design of this system. It has a big electric motor always connected to the wheels. So when slowing down, it's not having to downshift a transmission like you find in the Sportage or the Tucson hybrid. This is a really novel solution to the problem. In a lot of hybrids out there, when the battery is full, the brake pedal feels very different because you're not getting any regen. In a RAV4 hybrid or a Prius hybrid, the braking pedal feel also changes a bit because that system is going to try and use actual engine braking with a mechanical connection through that planetary power split system. This does not do that. It disengages the clutch, regens with the regen motor, and then shuttles that off and just spins the engine at whatever speed it wants to spin the engine. Also, Honda has done a really good job with braking feel. So if I transition from a moderate braking application to a rapid brake application like that, it feels very, very normal, very much like a regular braking system. In most Toyota brake systems, there's a bit of a delay. The downside, of course, is the braking distance, which again is on the long side. I'm also a little bit disappointed in the handling ability of the CR-V. Now, I don't have access to a skid pad, but I know folks that do, and they have put this below the previous generation CR-V and below a number of the key competition. I think that's due to the weight and sort of the refocus of the CR-V on being a bigger and more family-friendly option in this segment. Now, don't get me wrong, handling is still very good. It just doesn't come in at the top of this segment. Unfortunately, Honda has chosen not to put the torque vectoring axle from a vehicle like the Pilot into the CR-V. That's a bit disappointing because, of course, you can get a torque vectoring rear axle in the RAV4, and you will notice it power on in the corners. But I think Honda has struck a good balance between ride and handling. And when it comes to the ride score, I'm going to give this an A-. It does feel a little on the heavy side, especially in corners like this. You'll really notice the heaviness of the CR-V. There's definitely a decent amount of body roll, a decent amount of tip and dive, and the tires definitely give up grip a little bit. Obviously, you could improve that a bit if you'd got some grippier tires aftermarket, but the tuning of this vehicle is a little towards the softer side compared to previous generations. Cabin noise has improved with this generation. I measured 71 decibels at 50 miles an hour, putting this a little bit above average for the segment, so I'm going to go ahead and give this an A. Now we must move along to the tricky subject of fuel economy, the thing that a lot of you have been asking about. Now, if you're driving this vehicle gently in the city, you can keep in electric-only mode up to maybe about 30 miles an hour relatively easily. And if you're keeping your speeds below about 55 miles an hour, you will get excellent fuel economy even in the all-wheel drive model. But if you start going faster than about 55 to 60 miles an hour, you will notice the fuel economy start dropping rapidly. And that's just due to the design of this hybrid system. Remember that when we're talking about window sticker fuel economy numbers, that highway number is based on a test cycle where the average speed is under 50 miles an hour. So this does really well at those speeds, but at higher speeds, or if you're doing a lot of mountain climbing like I tend to, I drive this road every day, then you will notice your fuel economy dropping pretty rapidly. Over a week of mixed driving, I've been averaging 30.5 miles per gallon. That's about 10 miles per gallon lower than the RAV4 hybrid we last tested. The high-speed fixed ratio in this hybrid system is sort of like a manual transmission vehicle just having maybe fourth or fifth gear. In this particular vehicle, it engages right around 40 miles an hour, and at 40 miles an hour, I checked, and this engine was spinning at 1500 RPM. I had an OBD2 data logger connected to the vehicle. Now, if you bump that up to 65 miles an hour, the engine is spinning 1000 RPM faster. That's because we just have that one ratio to choose from when we're talking about higher speeds. This has a lower speed ratio, but that's primarily used for improving acceleration, hill climbing, that sort of thing down there. By the time you hit 75 miles an hour, this engine is spinning at around 2800 RPM, and it's definitely consuming more fuel than a RAV4 hybrid or a Tucson hybrid or the Sportage hybrid. And if you live in a state like Texas, which has really high speed limits, and you're routinely going 80 miles an hour or so, this vehicle tends to uncouple that fixed gear ratio, and it goes back to serial hybrid mode, which is actually a little bit less efficient than the parallel hybrid mode. Hi, little deer that just decided to try and commit suicide running across the road there. But at any rate, we're driving a hybrid, so we're trying to help save Bambi. When it comes to fuel economy, the bottom line is that it's highly dependent on the speed and the terrain that you're driving on, also your driving style, of course. If you live in a hilly area or you routinely drive higher speeds, this is going to get much worse fuel economy than the other hybrids that are available in this segment. But if you're really just going 60 to 65 miles an hour, or you do a lot of in-city driving, then this may actually beat some of those systems, just based on the design of the hybrid. This is pretty much borne out in some of the crowdsourced metrics that we see out there. There's not a great deal of data for the CR-V hybrid or the RAV4 hybrid, oddly enough, on Fuelie, but you will notice that the RAV4 hybrid generally gets higher fuel economy averages than this vehicle does. This is still going to be better than the 1.5 liter turbo, but I have to admit, I wish that they had focused the two speed range ratios in this hybrid system on maybe 65 and 75 mile an hour travel, rather than simply engaging down there at around 40 miles an hour. I think that would have just made for a better rounded system, especially for North American travel. Before we move on, we should talk about the all-wheel drive system on board. This is a regular mechanical all-wheel drive, just like we find in the Ford, the Kia, and the Hyundai hybrids. If I floor it, we get all four wheels gripping, because this will predict the fact that you floored it, it'll predict slip in some situations, lock the clutch up, and send power to the rear. If I'm going uphill, you will really notice the difference. All four wheels are just scrabbling for traction. In a RAV4 hybrid, it doesn't have that mechanical connection. It has a separate motor on the back than on the front. So the front tires get a lot of wheel spin, especially on a gravel road surface like this, then eventually it will send power to the rear. But it can never send as much power to the rear, and it's never going to be as coordinated as a mechanical all-wheel drive system. It is still going to be perfectly fine for a wide variety of different surfaces and situations, but if you want something that feels more normal, more traditional, and is going to have the best grip, you're probably going to want a mechanical all-wheel drive system like this. Getting back to the design of the CR-V, I just noticed that there is just some detritus stuck there in the grill because, again, it's been one of those days. Up front, we have a very different design than we've seen in the CR-V for a while. This certainly looks more rugged, more upright, and more fitting with the segment than the last generation did. The last generation CR-V kind of looked like a small minivan. Folks said they wanted something a bit more rough and tumble. That's exactly what Honda's given us. I'm not the biggest fan of the blacked out accents on this model. Let me know what you think about that. There really is no chrome going on up here except for these silvery surrounds down at the bottom of the bumper. These are full LED headlights, but they are reflectors, not projectors. And then we have the LED accent strip on top. Honda didn't just make the grille meaner, they also decided to give it a boxier and longer hood profile and a boxier body as well. This certainly has less minivan vibe going on right back here and is more in keeping with the segment. It's also grown versus the last generation. It is now on the long side of the segment at around 185 inches long. The previous generation had a very tall and a very plain hatch that really added to that minivan vibe. This has a very tall hatch still. You can see how far down it goes. That really improves the cargo load in practicality, but it certainly has much more style than the previous generation. I really like the taillights. These give me a bit of a Volvo vibe, especially with this kink right here. But weird twist, the turn signals, although they are amber, they're incandescent lamps. That's a bit of a weird thing because the HR-V, which is less expensive than this, has LED turn signals, and then of course some of the more expensive Hondas do as well. At the bottom of the bumper, Honda gives us well-integrated exhaust tips, and these are real exhaust outlets, not fake ones like we find in Volkswagens. Perhaps the most interesting thing going on under this hood is not the engine lineup itself, but how Honda has chosen to position those engines within the trim structure of the CR-V. The base model, the EX trim, that gets a 1.5-liter turbo producing 190 horsepower. Then you step up into this 2-liter hybrid system that produces 204 horsepower total. Then you step back into the 1.5-liter turbo, and then if you get the top-end Sport Touring trim, you go back to the hybrid system yet again. This hybrid system is a reworked version of the previous generation hybrid system. It uses basically the same 2-liter 4-cylinder engine with some tweaks over there on that side. That produces 145 horsepower in its own right. It's mated to a motor generator unit and then a drive motor on this side. So it's a 2-motor serial parallel hybrid system. Under a wide variety of operating conditions, below about 45 miles an hour, it's going to operate primarily as a serial hybrid. The big change for this generation is that it has a low-range mode, so there is the ability to mechanically drive the wheels from the engine over here to the wheels via a fixed ratio at lower speeds. That's part of how this now gets a 1,000-pound tow rating. That bumps up to 1,500 pounds if you choose the 1.5-liter turbo. The previous generation hybrid system was not rated to tow at all. Also a big change for this year, the hybrid system is now available with front-wheel drive. Previously, you had to get all-wheel drive. So if you want better fuel economy, you want to choose that 2-wheel drive model. You'll get 40 miles per gallon combined. If you get all-wheel drive, that drops down to 37. Meanwhile, the 1.5-liter turbo, it's going to range between 29 and 30 combined, depending on whether you choose front-wheel drive or all-wheel drive. After a week behind the wheel, I found front seat comfort to be excellent, but I do wish this had 4-way adjustable lumbar support. That's something that we don't find even in this top-end trim. There have been a few features that we've found in previous generation CR-Vs that we don't find in this generation, so as you're looking at that feature and option list, certainly keep that in mind. With this generation, Honda has decided to consolidate things and make more of a streamlined offering. If you frequently find yourself driving with a spouse or a loved one, you should also know that the front seat does not have the same range of motion as the driver's seat. It's missing the ability for the seat bottom cushion to adjust for height, tilt, and it doesn't have any adjustable lumbar. Rear seat passengers, on the other hand, will definitely be happy. With this front seat adjusted for me at 6 feet tall, I have tons of legroom left, and this is the kind of vehicle where you could easily put a rear-facing child seat behind an adult driver or an adult passenger up front. Something that you really can't do easily in a RAV4. That's certainly something that I noticed the last time I compared the CR-V and RAV4, and it's true with this generation as well. Moving over to the middle seat, there's not much of a hump going on here. There's still a very slight one, but pretty minor as far as an ICE vehicle goes. We have air vents back here, USB charge-only ports, and a reasonable amount of headroom as well. On the headroom chart, it looks like the CR-V is a bit disadvantaged in this area, but I suspect that's maybe when the seat is in this very upright and very uncomfortable position. It has a lot of recline to it, and whether it's all the way reclined like this, it actually has about 12 inches of motion or so, or whether it's in a more natural seating position, headroom is actually very generous. And part of that is because we don't find a panoramic moonroof here. In some of the options with a panoramic moonroof, headroom really suffers. However, in this vehicle, I am definitely staring at this drop in the ceiling because that's where the moonroof is going to go. The curve in the ceiling is really difficult to show on camera, but it's about a 1.5-inch drop from here to the area just above the rear seat passenger headrests. A practical cargo area has long been a hallmark of the CR-V, and that continues for this generation. Not only do we have that practical hatch and that really low opening, making loading cargo pretty easy, we have an absolutely enormous cargo area that is very square. You can really see that this hatch is very, very vertical for this segment. So even though the dimensions in terms of depth, from here to those seat backs is not as large as some, you can put boxier items in here. And that really meant that this excelled at our roller bag test. I fit 6 24-inch roller bags back here, and you can put smaller luggage like this 22-inch roller bag very, very easily back here. Now, on the downside, we don't have a spare tire. And there is going to be a size difference between the hybrid and the non-hybrid version. On Honda's spec sheet, it looks like they're the same, but when you look closer, you'll notice that this cargo load floor is fixed into place. And that's because if I lift it up, we don't find extra storage space, and we don't find that 2-level load floor. We also don't find a spare tire. Instead, we have the lithium-ion battery. I'm surprised that Honda positioned the battery in this location rather than putting it under the rear seats like some other companies do. You can see that there's a decent amount of wasted space going on there. Also, on this side, we have a fairly large bulge because we have the tire inflator kit, and this is the little funnel for the capless fuel filler. In my exclusive trunk comfort index, this has to lose a few points for lacking the spare tire and losing a bit of practicality versus the hybrid, but all in all, it's a pretty decent cargo area. Also a very practical touch, the rear seats fold completely flat, but on the other hand, they don't fold level with the cargo area in the rear. As we look around the interior, keep in mind this is the most expensive version of CR-V. We have a pretty typical sized moonroof over the driver and front passengers' heads, no panoramic moonroof here, height adjustable shoulder belts for the driver and front passenger, and 2-way adjustable headrests. This top-end trim features leather upholstery with contrasting stitching. We also have perforations on the seat back and seat bottom cushion, but no ventilated seats are available here. These are just heated. The bolstering is not terribly aggressive, but I found it comfortable for my body shape. As we move on over to the front doors, we find a reasonable percentage of soft touch and premium materials. We get kind of a knurled effect going on that trim strip right there in that section. That coordinates with the trim strip running right across the dashboard. Now, the dashboard itself is definitely styled similar to the CR-V, the Accord, and the Honda HR-V. We have this large section of cheese grater running right across the dashboard. Although the design is different than we find in the Accord, it's pretty similar to the Civic and the HR-V. My one concern about this design is that it's difficult to clean behind that honeycomb section right there. It does really hide the air vents, and these have a really solid feel to them. They have a nice click engagement to them. Everything feels really solid, and we have controls to open and close the outboard vents over there. I just worry about the cleaning. Up here we have soft touch materials, harder plastics lower just as you'd expect, and a large bin-style glove compartment. I was barely able to squeeze an 11-inch tablet computer inside. Moving up to the middle of the dashboard, we have the largest infotainment system available in the CR-V, which still feels a little on the small side, to be honest, especially since some of the competition can be had with dual 12-inch displays in the dashboard. This is also smaller than the top-end display that we now find on the RAV4. Toyota has refreshed the RAV4 with a just over 10-inch screen in the dashboard and a 12-inch instrument cluster. You can see that in this model we have an approximately 7-inch instrument cluster, and this screen over here is 9 inches. This is optional in the CR-V. The base screen is going to be a little bit smaller. This supports CarPlay and Android Auto, wireless or wired. If I go back to the home screen, we also have factory navigation built into the system if you're interested. Below the infotainment system, we have the controls for the dual-zone automatic climate control. We also have the USB input for the infotainment system. It's the regular USB-A port. The USB-C port is charge only. There's also a 12-volt power outlet, HC wireless charging mat there, although I wasn't able to charge smartphones through thicker cases. The drive mode selector is down here, and we don't have a hunt and peck shifter, so it's just a regular traditional gear shifter. That's certainly my preference. Hill descent control over here, auto brake hold, and then drive and B means increased engine braking, or increased regen in this particular model. Two big cup holders here, a small storage area for knickknacks, and then a pretty deep storage area down below. Going back to the instrument cluster, again, we have that partial LCD design. Right now, hill descent control is engaged, so we have a little readout there. You can also cycle through a decent number of other gauges. So, for instance, the power flow tells you where the power is going to and from the battery, range and fuel economy, speed, time, audio inputs, navigation turn-by-turn directions, and all-wheel drive torque distribution, etc. Keep in mind, this does not have a torque vectoring all-wheel drive system, though. Moving out from there, we find the 3-spoke steering wheel. You'll find the button for the steering wheel heater down there, controls for the infotainment system over here on this side, controls for that multifunction cluster right down there. And then on this side, we have the controls for the adaptive cruise control. On the back, we have paddles because this has adjustable regenerative braking. These are not shift paddles, they are regen brake paddles.
If you were concerned that the base price of the CR-V seemed just a little bit too high, you aren't the only one, and Honda has remedied that by inserting a new base trim in the lineup. So now the base 2 versions of the CR-V will get the regular turbo engine, then we get the hybrid, then we go back to the turbo, then we go back to the hybrid. But any way you slice it, this still has a pretty narrow pricing range, running from $28,410 on up to just under $40,000. Now, on the pricing schedule you're seeing in front of you, this is excluding plug-in hybrids and off-roady trims, because we don't find either of those in the CR-V. So to be fair, this doesn't include the TRD version of the RAV4, and it doesn't include the RAV4 Prime either, which is obviously going to be more expensive than the top-end $41,995 price. Now, the RAV4 Hybrid does get better fuel economy, and part of the reason we find a higher price tag is because it has more features than you'll find in the CR-V, most notably bigger screens. This generation, Toyota has decided to swap in a big full-screen LCD, and then of course we get the big new software screen in the dashboard. So if you've seen some older reviews of the RAV4 Hybrid, know that for 2023 there have been some pretty significant interior updates to keep in mind. You should also keep in mind that although we don't find a hybrid system available in the Nissan Rogue, and the top-end price appears to be a little bit higher than the CR-V, you're definitely going to get a better deal on the Nissan dealer lot than on the Honda lot, so your price out the door is likely still going to be lower. Fuel economy in the Rogue is actually very good, and that's one of the reasons that we don't really see a hybrid system in this model at this time. Interestingly enough, depending on the driving you're doing, especially if you're doing a lot of highway driving, you actually might get better fuel economy in the Nissan Rogue out on the open highway than in the CR-V Hybrid, and that is one of my complaints. Lastly, we have the Hyundai Tucson. This has really been clawing its way up the sales charts, and I think it's easy to see why. It's definitely distinctive, whether you like the look or not. I'll leave that up to you, but it's certainly distinctive, and it is really well priced, starting significantly less expensive than the CR-V. Now, we get less power in that base model, but if you opt for the hybrid trim, we get better fuel economy, and the top-end hybrid trim is going to be less expensive with more feature content and bigger screens inside. Also, this generation of Tucson and the related Kia Sportage grew significantly, and you'll really notice that in the back seat, where we have tons and tons of legroom and one of the biggest cargo areas available. If you're interested in a plug, you won't find one in the CR-V, but you will find a plug-in hybrid version of the Tucson, and generally speaking, that's going to be a little bit less expensive and more available than the RAV4 Prime. On the unfortunate side, you won't get a federal tax credit on that model because it's not built in the United States. Now let's run through the pros and cons and bottom line the CR-V. I do like the styling, but I can see that some folks might not. It definitely is more restrained than previous generations of the CR-V, and although it has definitely shed that sort of mini minivan look, it definitely is still very much a people hauler. The hybrid system is definitely powerful, it's definitely peppy, but fuel economy is not exactly its forte, and I was really hoping that this next generation of dual motor hybrid system from Honda would try and fix some of that, but it's very much the same as the last generation CR-V in all honesty. At higher speeds, if you're out on the open highway going 70 to 75 miles an hour, you will notice that fuel economy significantly drops off versus going 60 to 65 miles an hour. If you're doing a lot of in-city driving, a lot of stop-and-go driving, fuel economy is absolutely excellent and very, very similar to the RAV4 and the Tucson hybrids. But if you're doing a lot of open highway driving, you may actually get better fuel economy in some of the non-hybrids. This may surprise some folks, but if you're interested in the most reliable CR-V, you probably want the hybrid trim. The 1.5-liter turbo had some initial teething troubles, although those seem to be over. It definitely still is more mechanically complex than a non-turbocharged engine. Also, this doesn't even have a transmission in the traditional sense, so it's going to be a lot more reliable than the continuously variable automatic we find in the 1.5-liter turbo model. On the downside, the CR-V, generally speaking, lacks a lot of the bells and whistles that we find in the competition. The seats aren't as adjustable. We don't find big LCD screens, and I think that is the one missed opportunity in this interior. And it's something that we've seen really across the Honda lineup. The LCDs seem to be a little bit smaller than average for new models. I entirely understand how this works because product development cycles are extremely long, and Honda really had to dial in their LCD choices years ago in order for these models to come to market when they have. The problem is all the rest of the competition basically decided to go forward with big LCDs around that time, and Honda was just a little bit too conservative on the engineering side, and they've sort of been left holding the bag. Any way you slice it, you will find much bigger screens in the competition, and that includes the RAV4, which is older than this because they recently gave it that refresh. If you're not a fan of big screens, obviously this is not a problem, but I'm really curious, is that a problem for you down there in the comments section? Even if you're not necessarily the biggest fan of big screens, it certainly makes the dashboard look more modern if they're there, and perhaps a little bit old school if they're not. And speaking of the interior design, let me know what you think about Honda using basically the same interior design in so many different products. This is very, very similar to the Civic, to the HR-V, etc., to the Honda Accord as well. Let me know if that's a pro or a con down there. If I were shopping in this segment, I have to admit I would probably choose a RAV4 hybrid over the CR-V hybrid. It doesn't have the mechanical all-wheel drive system, but it has significantly better fuel economy and bigger screens. Also, generally speaking, higher reliability in this generation. I would also be willing to take a look at the Sportage and the Tucson because they are incredibly roomy inside. They have a real mechanical all-wheel drive system, a traditional 6-speed automatic if you prefer that feel, and still absolutely excellent fuel economy. The Ford Escape, also still a solid option, and honestly, the Equinox, if you're looking for a bargain basement option, has been pretty reliable and is pretty roomy inside as well. And that's the interesting twist here in this segment. There are very few bad options. In fact, pretty much everything in the compact crossover segment I would recommend depending on your needs at the moment. So it's really hard to go wrong with the variety that is available. Let me know what you would pick. Find me over at Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all of their social places. And of course, remember, sound off down there. Check out the merch store as well. If you want to find some merch, you might find some merch on the back walls here and there. You can get a number of updated t-shirt designs there as well. And I'll see all of you next week.